Good evening. I'm Barbara Jones. Welcome to Harper's Weekly News. President Lincoln raised the Stars and Stripes opposite Independence Hall, Philadelphia, on the morning of Washington's birthday, just in front of the main entrance to the State House and but a few feet from the Sacred Hall of Liberty. A large platform had been erected for the president-elect to stand upon before the people while he raised the starry banner of the Republic. The elevation, nearly 6 feet, enabled a vast multitude to observe everything enacted thereon. The front and sides of the stage were wrapped around with an American flag, while lesser flags floated from the stanchions. Before the flag was raised, prayer was offered, and Mr. S. Renton, on behalf of the city of Philadelphia, addressed Mr. Lincoln in words of welcome. The president replied as follows.
Fellow citizens, I am invited and called before you to participate in raising above Independence Hall the flag of our country, with an additional star upon it. I propose now, in advance of performing this very pleasant and complimentary duty, to say a few words. I propose to say that when that flag was originally raised here, it had but 13 stars. I wish to call your attention to the fact that, under the blessing of God, each additional star added to that flag has given additional prosperity and happiness to this country until it has advanced to its present condition. And its welfare in the future, as well as in the past, is in your hands. Cultivating the spirit that animated our fathers, who gave renown and celebrity to this hall, cherishing that fraternal feeling which has so long characterized us as a nation, excluding passion, ill temper, and precipitate action on all occasions, I think we may promise ourselves that not only the new star placed upon that flag shall be permitted to remain there, to our permanent prosperity for years to come, but additional ones shall from time to time be placed there, until we shall number, as was anticipated by the great historian, 500 millions of happy and prosperous people. With these few remarks, I proceed to the very agreeable duty assigned by me.
We present this image of the Capitol Dome.
At last, the practical statesmen of the country seem to see the way clear to a settlement of the pending political trouble, which has endangered the existence of our Confederacy. It seems pretty certain now that, by conceding certain points not inconsistent with the statement of principles on which President Lincoln claimed the suffrages of his fellow citizens in November last, the border slave states can be retained in the Union. Whatever obstacles of detail may intervene, experienced observers are satisfied that a compromise will shortly be made which may conserve the allegiance of Virginia, North Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas to the Union. The prospect is, of course, bitter and nauseous to the old political leaders. It is natural that they should repine at the revolution which is sweeping them from the political arena. For a large segment of a century, Senators Mason and Hunter of Virginia, for instance, have been the most powerful personages in American politics. The one, at the head of the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs, has really regulated our foreign relations for more than 10 years. The other Virginia senator has been for nearly 16 years chairman of the Senate Committee on Ways and Means. According to parliamentary usage, he is the leader of the Senate. He has been, as the custom is, dictator in his committee, which is dictator in the Senate, on all money bills. No tariff, or loan, or appropriation bill has ever passed against his opinion. Happily for the country, the interest of Virginia is not exclusively the interest of these two senators. Granted, if you will, for the sake of argument, that the Southern rebellion against the election of a sectional president is treason and liable to punishment. Is it wise? Is it prudent? Is it possible to punish it? Is it not wiser and better to deal with it as a fact and so handle it, that it may yield by and by to its own inherent weakness and the vice of its origin? If rulers had always despised outbursts of popular passion and prejudice, there would have been no government on earth at the present time. The oldest and best of the free governments in the world, that of Great Britain, has repeatedly yielded to popular pressure, and her best statesmen have repeatedly sacrificed their own convictions to temporary exigencies, wisely deeming that popular errors contain within themselves the elements of their own correction, while civil war nursed no germs but hate, strife, mood, rapine, and ruin. No, nor need we go abroad for examples of the spirit of concession to error and compromise with prejudice. The formation of the Confederacy was a wonderful instance of compromise. Our first president, General Washington, frequently abandoned his own designs to adopt the views of others which he deemed less sound for the sake of peace. For the sake of peace, Jefferson, as we learn from his writings, departed from his peculiar principles on numberless occasions. So did Madison, Monroe, and Adams. Jackson, who is so often quoted as an example by the opponents of compromise, did directly compromise in the most open way to avoid a civil war with the little state of South Carolina. When the other southern states were ready to crush her out at a moment's notice, in a word, our government, like all other governments, like every collective body, like every family, rests upon the cornerstone of compromise. More than this, more than one-half the ties existing between the Gulf states and the Union remain unsevered. The United States mail is carried throughout the seceding states. The United States patent laws and copyright laws still obtain. Not 5% of the Southern officers in the United States Army and Navy have resigned their commissions. South Carolina, on the eve of certain secession, still sent her census returns faithfully to Washington. Surely this is a very mild kind of separation. It would undoubtedly be a very mischievous undertaking to keep half a dozen states in the Union against the deliberate wishes of their people. Whatever popular feeling, roused to frenzy by the seizure of forts, arsenals, revenue cutters, and mints, might prompt on the spur of the moment, there can be no question but the enterprise of holding the Union together by force would ultimately prove futile. It would be in violation of the principle of our institution. As the leaders of the Southern Confederacy come to grapple with the practical difficulties of their position, they will find it much harder than they supposed to tear asunder a confederacy so closely knit together as ours. The passage of secession ordinances amidst popular clamor, bell ringing, and the firing of salutes, the muster of brave young men for the attack of forts, and the discussion of new flags and new national emblems are all very easy and very pleasant work. But when it comes to the organization of a new postal system at a dead loss of some $2 million a year, of a new revenue system on some experimental basis, of a new scheme of taxation which takes money out of the pockets of poor and rich, of new copyright and patent systems, of new naval and military schools, and of a new set of treaties with the world at large, the task will not prove so agreeable. Especially difficult will be the negotiation of foreign treaties be found. Englishmen and Frenchmen are universally what we call garrison abolitionists. They admit Negroes to their table and permit their daughters to marry them. More than one British judge, wearing the ermine and holding the Queen's Commission, is fully half Negro. Negroes are admitted to society in London. Only the other day, a high-bred girl of a wealthy British family married a coal-black African without the least objection from her friends. It has been suggested that the cotton question would rule the policy of Great Britain and France. This is a fallacy. If we of the North give our Southern friends time enough to encounter these difficulties fairly, they will find that, after all, we are their best friends, and that they can gain nothing by throwing us off. It is well that they should try their experiment.
Flight of the President to Washington. The city was startled on Saturday by the intelligence that the President-elect, instead of proceeding on his journey to Washington from Harrisburg in accordance with the published program on Saturday morning, had left the latter city secretly on a special train on Friday night, and returning to Philadelphia had passed thence unrecognized through Baltimore and was already in the federal capital. This step, it appears, was induced by the desire to avoid threatened trouble in Baltimore, and was taken at the earnest solicitation of his friends and leading Republicans in Washington, who had received authentic information that an organized demonstration would be made against him in Baltimore, if indeed he were allowed to reach there alive, for it was also feared that an attempt would be made to throw the presidential train from the track on the Northern Central Railroad. This information, it appears, was imparted to Mr. Lincoln on Thursday night at Philadelphia, and he consented, after considerable hesitation, to the private arrangement which was subsequently carried into effect. He reached Washington early on Saturday morning and proceeded quietly to his hotel, his arrival being known to but a few. Right. He soon afterward, in company with Senator Seward, paid a visit to President Buchanan and interchanged civilities with him and other gentlemen of distinction.
One version of the plot. The Herald correspondent says, "It appears that the plot was concocted in Baltimore. The exact mode in which the conspirators intended to consummate their designs has not yet transpired, but enough is known to be satisfactory that either an infernal machine was to be placed under the cars or railway, like the Orsini attempt upon Napoleon, or some obstruction placed upon the track, whereby the train would be thrown down an embankment at some convenient spot. And that if these failed, then, on the arrival at Baltimore, during the rush and crush of the crowd, as at Buffalo, by knife or pistol, the assassination was to be effected." Another version. The Times correspondent says, on Thursday night, after he had retired, Mr. Lincoln was aroused and informed that a stranger desired to see him on a matter of life or death. He declined to admit him unless he gave his name, which he at once did. Of such prestige did the name carry that while Mr. Lincoln was yet disrobed, he granted an interview to the caller. A prolonged conversation elicited the fact that an organized body of men had determined that Mr. Lincoln should not be inaugurated, and that he should never leave the city of Baltimore alive, if indeed he ever entered it. The list of the names of the conspirators presented a most astonishing array of persons high in Southern confidence, and some whose fame is not to this country alone. Statesmen laid the plan, bankers endorsed it, and adventurers were to carry it into effect. As they understood Mr. Lincoln was to leave Harrisburg at 9 o'clock this morning by special train, and the idea was, if possible, to throw the cars from the road at some point where they would rush down a steep embankment and destroy in a moment the lives of all on board. In the case of the failure of this project, their plan was to surround the carriage on the way from depot to depot in Baltimore and assassinate him with dagger or pistol shot. Mr. Lincoln did not want to yield, and Colonel Sumner actually cried with indignation, but Mrs. Lincoln, seconded by Mr. Judd and Mr. Lincoln's original informant, insisted upon it, and at 9 o'clock Mr. Lincoln left on a special train. He wore a Scotch plaid cap and a very long military coat, so that he was entirely unrecognizable.
No attack to be made on Fort Sumter. Information from the highest sources in Charleston give assurance that no immediate attack is mediated on Fort Sumter. Governor Pickens has restrained any demonstration thus far and was glad to be relieved of further responsibility by the action of Montgomery. Major Anderson writes that no unusual preparations have been recently made, and some of the works have been apparently suspended. The English firm against slavery. John Mitchell writes as follows in his last letter from Paris to the Charleston Mercury. On the whole, I would beg most earnestly to impress upon you the conviction that in Europe generally, but in England particularly, you have no chance, no locus standi, no pretension to be considered as Christian men, or perhaps as human beings, except the cotton field alone. But for that, and the interest hanging upon that, you would be hunted from the face of the earth and erased from creation by the indignant voice of an outraged 19th century. Unhappily stupid and driveling century, it falls to you. It devolves upon you, especially you Southern men of America, to bring back men's minds to the manly and straightforward days of old, days when there were no poorhouses and when fathers and mothers did not strangle their children for the sake of the burial fees. President Jefferson Davis's inauguration at Montgomery. On page 157, we publish a picture of the inauguration of President Davis of the Southern Confederacy at Montgomery, Alabama on February 18th from a photograph obligingly placed at our disposal. We published part of the inaugural in our last number. A lady who witnessed the scene thus writes to a friend in the city. The president is a pleasant-looking old gentleman of about 50 years of age. He was escorted to the Capitol by the military, he being in an elegant carriage, drawn by 6 white horses. After he took his seat on the platform in front of the Capitol, and a short prayer had been offered, he read a very neat little speech, not making any promises, but hoping, by God's help, to be able to fulfill all expectations. He took the oath amidst the deepest silence, and when he raised his hand and his eyes to heaven and said, "So help me God, I think I never saw any scene so solemn and impressive," He puts me much in mind of General Jackson in the appearance and character, though he is much more of a gentleman in his manners than the old general ever wished to be. He had a reception last night, which I attended. I walked about and exchanged greetings with my friends, but would not shake hands with the president, for I thought I would not be recognized today, and so would rather wait for a more private introduction. The vice president is a constant visitor at the house where I stay. He is very slight and delicate looking, has more the appearance of a dead man than a living one, until he begins to speak, when you forget entirely how ugly he is.
This article of Nursery Furniture is different from, superior to, and supplies the place of everything heretofore used for that purpose. It combines by simple changes, which may be instantly made, a safe, comfortable sleeping couch, a delightful baby jumper, a hobby horse, nursery, dining and rocking chair, a swing, a stylish carriage and perambulator, a play and work stand. It is suspended from the ceiling, or a graceful standard, or by a steel spring, is cushioned so as to require no bedding, and is tastefully trimmed in various styles. At prices ranging from $8 to $25, sent by express everywhere. It will save in washing and bringing up one child more than its cost, and much of the time and attention of mother and nurse, it gives the child entire freedom of action for body and limbs, ensures a healthy action of the stomach and bowels, promotes and strengthens the natural motion and development of the system, preserving it from injury or the possibility of danger. Overstrung grand, square, and upright pianos are pronounced to be the best pianos manufactured. Each instrument warranted 5 years. Sent for circular. Warerooms and Manufactory, 75 to 85 East 13th Street, near Broadway, New York.